All right. We have a couple of people coming in. Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Feel free to settle in, but also if you would like to grab any water or your notebook, get out a new Google Doc, please do. We're still waiting for others to join us. But in the meantime, feel free to open up the chat and share where you're joining from and also what your role looks like. We always have a good mix of SEO managers, content marketers, growth leads, people that are AI experts or even just AI curious, a bunch of other agency folks in the room. So feel free to share in the chat what your role is and also where you're calling in from. All right. Abhishek, content marketer from Chennai. Welcome, welcome. And then we also have Odion calling in from Nigeria, another big content head. Love it. Shubham, senior growth lead in Bangalore. Lucine calling in from Armenia, link building. Awesome. That's great. Noman, co-founder of Testrick from Pakistan. Shashank, another fellow content marketer from Chennai. Srini, software engineer from Chennai. Lokesh, a growth marketing manager at We360 AI. Chetan, founder of Ewan Lead from Bangalore. Amazing. We're just going to get started in about a minute. I want to make sure that everybody gets at least a couple of minutes of grace time before, we get into it. And then we have Arsalan Marketing and Disrupt.com from Pakistan. Amazing. Cool. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for being here. I'm Glenn Bona, Associate Director of Organic Growth at Triple Dart, and your host for today's Slate workshop. And like you, I am super excited for what we're about to get into. Content Refresh Playbook, Win AI Search, and SEO. And here is why this one matters, because most content teams are spending a ton of time and a ton of money creating a lot of net new content, right? When sometimes the biggest ROI lever on your plate is the content that you already have. Pages that already have backlinks, already have authority, intent alignment, but you might not know this. Some of them could be quietly bleeding rankings, losing clicks, even losing AI citations that you didn't even know that you're competing for. So today we're going to fix that with strategy first, and then with a live build or a showcase within Slate. And you're going to walk away with both. Before we get started, I wanted to address two housekeeping items. If you have any questions during the presentation, please drop them into the chat. We're going to have a Q&A at the end. And number two is, yes, we will be sharing the recording. So if you're watching this after the fact, hello, hello. So yeah, let's get into it. Today's guest is Usman, who is an organic growth strategist helping B2B SaaS companies turn search into a revenue engine. He's done work for Loom, Adobe, and ActiveCampaign, and he's currently driving discoverability at Modash. But the numbers speak louder than the logos themselves, and trust me, the logos are pretty big, right? At Modash, 2 times pipeline growth in 8 months. At Hostfully, 186% increase in inbound demos. At Cold IQ, 162% rise in organic meetings booked. And today he's bringing a playbook behind those results and showing it live inside Slate. Usman, really glad to have you here.
Thanks so much, Glenn. Appreciate it. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. Before I hand things over, Quick context on Slate because the live demo will make a lot more sense with this foundation laid. Slate is a content automation platform built for SEO and content teams. Four things at its core. Number one, track your AI and search visibility. Number two, build agents that run on a schedule. Number three, fix or build content using brand aligned templates. And lastly, number four, publish directly to your CMS. No manual handoffs anymore, which is really nice. And as you can see on the bottom of the slide, some of the teams already running Slate, companies like Razorpay, Glean, and WeWork, a mix of scale and category, which gives you a sense of the range of use cases the platform supports. And if you want to see what it looks like against your own content library, head to slatehq.com to book a demo, and our team will also drop a link in the chat so you can easily click on that. Moving on, here's how it all connects. Slate isn't just a collection of features. We've heard that before, right? It's actually a closed loop. Insights feed into actions, actions feed into workflows, workflows feed into the outputs that we want, and outputs feed back into the next cycle, right? So you got sheets for bulk execution across hundreds of URLs. You have the brand kit to keep every output on brand and on voice, super blocks as a drag and drop logic that you can reuse, and Cowork for building custom agents with just a prompt. The platform is as only good as the strategy running inside of it, and that's what Usman is actually here to show you. So before I hand it over officially to him, I want to quickly frame what he's going to cover because this is your typical content refresh talk. He's going to walk through four frameworks where freshness actually moves the needle and why AI search changes the calculus entirely. The sixth force is acting on every page that a strong refresh needs to address. How to diagnose the right problem before you treat it, because a page that's stuck on, let's say, page two is a versus a page losing traffic. They need different types of fixes. They need different types of medicine, right? And finally, the refresh engine itself, a five-step system that takes a page from input to finally optimize output in one continuous run. By the time he's done with the strategy, he'll open up the hood to Slate where you're going to see the whole thing. So if you ever felt like your refresh process is a little bit ad hoc, that ends today. So please pay close attention. Usman, feel free to take it away.
Sure thing. Thank you so much. Hey, everyone. So let's dive in. I'm super, super excited. And this topic is pretty interesting because I feel like content refresh is one of those things which you can start with, as the first building blocks when you have automation running for you. So it's like one of those use cases where you can play with a lot of stuff. So I have a couple of concepts that I really want to start with before we dive into building stuff and showing you how it works within automation. So the first thing, just to set the tables, the question is, why do we even care about freshness, right? And I'm not going to talk about it from a really high level. You already know you have been working in search marketing in one shape or another. So we know that up-to-date content helps with just general UX, right? People who read your content, consume your content, in any shape or form, in any format, they want their information to be up to date. So that's like one thing, right? The building block. We also know that traditional search is something that it impacts in some capacity, right? So it happens to be more of a moderate ranking factor when it comes to traditional search. Of course, there are many studies that talks about this, how Google rankings are still correlated with having your content up to date. And then the big picture here is that when it comes to AI search as a channel, we have seen this again and again, that the impact of your content being fresh, being up to date, is the highest. And this is just like something that this channel loves for some reason. So there are multiple studies done by folks like Ahrefs, where they studied like 17 million citations. Kevin Indig also partnered up with some other companies to run the study. And also Lily Ray has talked about this idea, which is, starts like 50% of citations inside ChatGPT were fresher than 13 weeks, right? So the content that was published or at least updated in the last 13 weeks was accounting for about 50% of citations generated by those LLMs. Same goes for 76% of updated content in the last 30 days in another study, and about 3x decay if skipped in 1 quarter. So, like within 3 months, if you skip updating your content, you can see a decline by 3x within AI search as a channel. So, it's pretty clear that this channel, LLM, AI, whatever you want to call it just loves citing content which is up to date, talking about steps, talking about information, stats, everything that just feels like it has been recently injected with pure information. So that's why freshness is something that you should care about. Of course, it will generally still help with traditional SEO, but AI search has a special love for it. Now, the way I think about content freshness, right, is in 6 different components, 6 different forces, right? So when you say, hey, we want to have content that is up to date, we want to refresh our content, we want to re-optimize it, whatever language you want to use, it's still an umbrella term, right? We're talking about multiple things under the hood. So let's break it down. When we say we want to make our content up to date, it's generally speaking a collection of 2 different kind of things. One is substance, so the actual core material in your content. The second one is your form and voice, right? So this is where you talk about your brand positioning and stuff like that. So within this diagram, you can see, for example, the part of substance breaks down into 3 additional core components. So we have number one, data freshness, right? That's at the top. So very objective stats, percentages, data, any kind of resources that you're plugging into your content, they need to be up to date. That's number one. The second thing is intent alignment. So you know how search intent changes over time, SERPs evolve over time. One algorithm update comes and it just shuffles everything. So I guess a classic example of this would be, if you search for something like how to tie a tie, right? Maybe 3 years back, it might be a blog post. Maybe 1 year back, it may become blog post with a lot of visuals. And now who knows, at this point, it's like a lot of YouTube videos, right? So looking at what sort of an intent I'm optimizing for based on the topic, that's again a factor of content freshness. The third one would be competitive depth, right? This is your typical just going through the SERPs and seeing, how in depth has the competitors created content on this topic. Can we, just compete with them from a substance standpoint, make our content more deep? And this is not just word count. This is more about holistic coverage. So have we talked about everything around this particular topic that will answer all of the questions of our customers? So those are the 3 parts that I think about under substance, right? The core material. Then you have stuff that adds more of, brand voice, brand messaging, positioning, all of that stuff. So this is where I think about, for example, how you structure your content for general readability. This is where I would classify, H1, H2s, H3s, FAQs, and stuff like that. Are there any additional structural elements that you can add now, which you didn't add like 12 months back? The second part would be brand positioning. So making sure that the content that you create, it doesn't sound generic, right? Even if you're using automation, it should have your brand voice. It should be targeted towards your ICP. It should just feel different, right? It should just have uniqueness in its value. I guess a litmus test is if you just ended up refreshing your content, and if you were to give it to someone on your team, and or maybe a customer, ideally speaking, and if you say, hey, this is one piece of content and here's another one from one of our competitor, without letting them know, can they differentiate from the two, right? That is like how you can figure out, is my content in line with my brand messaging? And then number 6 is, of course, citation hygiene. So do we have neutral sources? Are we talking about tribals? Are we talking about them in a subjective way, trying to hammer them, all of that stuff? So this is how I think about the 6 forces, like 6 different elements that make a content refresh really, really strong. And within this workflow, you will see that the one that we're just going to run live in a few minutes, how we cover all of them. So moving forward, when we think about refreshing any piece of content, there's usually a reason behind it, right? Typically something happens and now we want to refresh the content. Number one, it could be, of course, just, like the content is just outdated, it was never up to date. But from a performance standpoint, there are three typical cases that I think about. Of course there can be more, but these are like the general broad buckets that I can draw. So these would be, for example, a case where, let's say, you're almost on page one, right? So you have created the piece of content that you wanted to create. It's in the maybe in the best shape possible, but still you haven't moved into the first page for some reason. There would be some pages that are just losing rankings over time. Again, the actual reason behind it, the actual deeper diagnosis could be anything. It could be, a Google algorithm update came and it reshuffled what the SERPs look like. Maybe the search demand has just shifted into a different direction, all of that stuff. But you're basically losing rankings. And when I say rankings, I mean both in traditional sense, Google rankings, as well as maybe losing AI visibility. And number three would be, of course, losing traffic in any shape or form. Even if rankings were there, for some reason, your content has just started dipping in traffic. An example of this could be, for example, just it not attracting the right amount of CTR anymore, right? So for some reason, maybe the competitors updated their title tags or stuff like that, and now your content, although still has not lost a lot of rankings, is yet not gathering a lot of clicks. So the prescription for all of these would be different, meaning you cannot just have a general playbook of, this is how we optimize content applied to every single case. So the way I think about this is like, a general, like, you go to our doctor and you are a patient, the prescription will be specific to the diagnosis made. So again, there would be things like, hey, we might want to optimize for depth and heading gap, or maybe keyword enrichment. If you are just very close to the page one, we might not need complete revamps. If you're losing rankings, there might be, we might need to close coverage gaps. We might need to add missing sections. We might need to improve internal links. And again, like a bunch of other prescriptions and recommendations for the case where you're losing traffic. Again, these are not exhaustive lists. These are just to paint a picture of what are some of the areas where we really need refresh as a way of getting us out of the dig. So yeah, so I think this covers everything. And again, within the workflow, you're going to see how we tackle this, how the workflow is designed in a way that it actually finds what the problem is, both by taking an input from the user as well as detecting it on its own. Cool. So now let's move on. I want to give you an inside view of the workflow before we jump in. So from a high level, right? Because when I start sharing my screen and I show you the actual workflow inside Slate, it can be a little overwhelming. There are a lot of nodes because we of course wanted to make it right and automate as much as possible without sacrificing quality. So I just thought maybe painting a picture with a broad level thesis of, hey, these are the a couple of different stages that the content is moving through would be helpful when you finally look at the workflow. So what's basically going on is we have an input page, right? What we usually give to the workflow is a couple of different input fields. So the page URL, of course, but then also a diagnosis that we've identified. It also still verifies it later on, but it starts with that. And then it starts with the first stage, which contains a bunch of different nodes. The first stage is basically auditing, right? What's already there. So it scrapes your page, it extracts the keywords that you're already ranking for, the ones that would be related keywords that you can potentially rank for. It flags outdated statistics within the content, and it detects other kind of quality issues that we'll look into. The second stage, again, every single stage contains a list of different nodes, a list of different steps. So the second stage is where it looks at your content from a competitive landscape. So it identifies the competitors' brands in the SERPs. Because again, the competitors, we're not talking about business competitors, we're also talking about SERP competitors, which needs to be identified depending on the page and the keyword. Then the workflow will expand the keywords using SEMrush API. It will scrape the top 5 search results and then build an exclusion list, right? Because of course we want to exclude software aggregator sites or maybe other kind of, Reddit, for example, or maybe Wikipedia, wherever it shows up. Then the next stage is to verify. So this is where there's a loop that runs for every single stat in the page, fact checks everything live on the web, researches fresh statistics that can be injected into the article, and also finds new kind of trends and angles that can be cited in. The fourth stage is diagnosis. This is where, again, it classifies the issue. So you, of course, give it an input. This is what I think is happening with my page, with my content. But then again, based on the data that it has, it will segment the problem into different kind of brackets. So is it losing ranking? Is it almost on page one? Is it losing traffic? And again, these are just 2 to 3 examples, actual problems that you can highlight as a potential problem with your content. The list is much bigger than this, and you can be more specific. You can just add more comments. It's not that you have to pick out of these 3. And then finally, it branches everything into matching deep analysis. At the rewrite stage, this is where the content is finally rewriting everything based on all of the insights that it has collected throughout all of these stages. This is where the blending is happening, right? This is where it's basically generating the full HTML with some color tracking. Again, this is something that I will cover. So if this sounds weird, it's all going to be fine in a few minutes. Basically, what this means is it gives us a nice looking interface where we can see what part of the content has been refreshed, what part of the content is unchanged because it was maybe good enough, and what part of the content it suggests to, let's say, delete or something like that. And then finally, you can even take it to the next stage where you can publish it automatically if you have your CMS connected. So this is basically how the entire workflow works. It's divided in different stages. Every single stage has a bunch of different modules and a bunch of different nodes. And of course, we'll get into the tactics of this now, jumping into Slate. Are we good here? Cool. So let's dive into the actual workflow now and show you the fun stuff. Let me see. What tab do I have it here? All right. So we're using this product called Slate. If you folks can see my screen. And this is where the workflow lives, right? And there are a ton of features, to be honest. This is like one of the most impressive automation tools that I've been using recently. So the way it works, as I mentioned, there are 3 different input fields. The fourth one is optional. So we start with one particular URL, right? And you don't have to do this like manually one page at a time. We're actually going to run this in bulk, but this is just to show you really quickly the actual mechanics of the workflow. So let's add one page here, and then while the workflow runs, perhaps we can talk more about the actual nodes and what's happening at each of the stage. So I'm going to pick one page from Modash, the blog post, which is influencer marketing campaign examples, right? Now I'm going to mention the refresh issue. So the problem with this particular page is that it is on second page as of now in terms of Google rankings. So we're going to say stuff like maybe, it's stuck on second page, Google. And of course, you can still highlight anything else that you want. You can be more specific. You can talk about other kind of things like, hey, the content is good, but the traffic is still going down and stuff like that. So based on the diagnosis that it can make, it's going to recommend a couple of actions and then actually implement it within the content. The third part is brand kit. And this is really important. This is like the backbone of creating really good content, which is that you have to add your brand kit within Slate. And this is where you can just pull it up. Brand kit is basically where your brand's ICP, positioning, messaging, writing guidelines, all of that stuff lives. I think I have it open in a separate tab, so maybe I can just show you really quick. So what I just pulled right now under brand kit is something that Slate gives you the option to add. So if you go into brand kit under workspace settings, it will give you a couple of things that you can plug. So for example, of course, the name, the URL, about the brand. This is again where you can be very much, you can describe the things about your brand, your philosophy, the company, the features in a lot of detail. Then we have ICP, so ideal customer profile. Again, you can be thorough here if you want. We have writing style. So talk about the author persona that you're writing with, the CTA text that you want to use, even the CTA destination URL. You can also attach a couple of writing samples. I have one here, which was a recent blog post that we published. You can mention competitors and some other core kind of custom variables that you want to introduce if you have any. All right, so going back to the workflow, I'm going to run this for this one page. Now, additional notes, this is something that we recently added, which is to cover everything that becomes more specific for the kind of things that you're expecting in your content. So for example, this is where you can have guidelines related to your brand's POV, your narrative angle. The best way to think about this, in my opinion, is, of course, it can be things like, hey, talk about this one case study that we have, or here's a subject matter expert quote that you can introduce into the content. But then you can also actually shape narratives. So for example, if this is the piece, right, influencer marketing campaign examples, um, a good narrative angle that we can lead with is maybe framing it, and again, this is based on what Modash actually believes about influencer marketing campaigns, which is that uh, they're not supposed to be just a post and a payout, right? They're supposed to be these repeatable systems in the form of influencer partnerships, which turn creators, right, that you work with into long-term measurable growth partners. Not just like, hey, post this and we'll pay you, but rather building long-term relationships. So that is something that I can add as a note here. I'm going to say lead with the framing that influencer marketing campaigns aren't a post and a payout. They're a repeatable system for turning creator partnerships into measurable growth. So again, it can take my angle, it can take a expert code, it can take maybe a couple of case studies that I might have and plug them in. Uh, I think this is the backbone, again, like of the workflows value, this and the brand kit, because these are the two values where you can be more specific about how you want the content to be created for your brand specifically, not just what's already created on the SERPs, right? So we're going to run the workflow now. Looks like we have everything that we needed, and I think it should initiate everything. It takes a couple of minutes to run through everything, but while it runs, we can take the time to actually go through what's happening in the backend. So I have, so if you click edit workflow, you're going to see the backend engine of how the workflow is built, how everything is stitched together. So while this runs, we can go into the other tab. I'm just going to share my screen here. So this is where we have the, everything stitched together, right? Everything just put together in a nice looking workflow. So as you noticed, we have the same input fields at the first step. We're giving the URL, the refresh issue, the brand kit. It's pulling from Slate's brand kits, and then additional notes. Now, what it's doing is the second step, right, based on what you've provided as input, is it's taking the URL and just scraping the content in the form of an HTML page. Then what it does is it gets the current year. So just so it knows, for example, when you have a statistic back from 2023, it understands that it is outdated and it does not mistakes it for it to be updated or up to date. The next step is extracting images and cleaning up the HTML. Now, there are parts of this workflow that are just technical, but basically what they have is a function of cleanliness, right? Formatting. So when you're using a workflow automation in any shape or form, there would be, of course, code blocks that you would be using to just parse through the content and change them into different shapes and forms. So that's what we're doing here. We're just extracting the images so we can play with the raw HTML, and then we're going to plug them back in at the end of the workflow. So that's what we're doing here. The next step is the workflow is being asked to act as an expert SEO auditor. So we have an LLM step where it's taking the input from the last step 2, which is this one. And what it's doing is it's looking at it and giving us a bunch of different things. So we're asking for a primary keyword to be extracted, the meta title, the meta description, a couple of other things, as you can see already, right? So once that is done, it moves on to the next stage, which is competitive intelligence. So this is where the workflow will identify, again, it's an LLM step. So we have, GPT-4o Mini as a model being used, and it's identifying all of our brand's competitors and domains that we should not mention within the content, right? Again, you can change this if you want. You can, if you're fine with mentioning competitors and you don't have a strict, competitor-oriented legal policy or something, you can totally change this prompt to be more flexible. But this is where we're guiding the workflow, the agent, if you want to call it. Technically, it's not an agent, although is that, we want to exclude specific companies. So let's identify what the competitors would be and let's exclude them from the content. Next up, it's picking the target keyword, the primary keyword that it extracted in the last stage, and running through SEMrush API to find related keywords. So it's, picking US as the location, and finding a bunch of different broad match keywords using SEMrush. Pretty simple, right? Now, once those keywords are collected, in the next step, it's going to run the search for the primary keyword. Let me see. Oh, it looks like we have step 8, 9. Okay, so it looks like it's the same step. We're just extracting. Yeah, so we're basically looking through the same primary keyword through SEMrush, finding related keywords. And now we have finally another code block. What this is doing is deduplicating the keywords, just like making it more clean, turning it into a particular format using Python as a script, so that we can start doing the SERP analysis. Now, this is where once all the keywords are collected and they've been cleaned into a specific format, we're running Google search for those primary keywords. What we're specifically looking for is what kind of SERP overviews are we seeing right within the SERPs for the primary keyword. So basically, if you open this up, it's going to highlight, for example, that we're looking for structured results. We want to extract everything, and then the next step, you're going to see this LLM step that is instructed to extract specifically if it's seeing, for example, a featured snippet. People also ask video carousel, an image pack, anything as such, right? So basically just thinking of different kind of SERP features, and AI overview could also be one. And it's basically just extracting what the SERPs looks like so it can optimize the content accordingly. Next up, again, there's a code block. It's again important for excluding some of the SERP competitors that we don't really want to take into account. So these would be things like Reddit or maybe Twitter, LinkedIn. As you already know, many of these sites will dominate many of the keyword rankings, and we don't want them to dilute what kind of output we produce. So by removing them, we can focus specifically on other kind of pages that we really want to model out against. And then, of course, we're going to still lay out on top of it our brand guidelines, stuff like that. So the next step is, again, another Google search. We're running this search specifically with this site query parameter. So we're saying site should be our website and the primary keyword. This is where we're trying to find out what kind of content we already have on the site for that topic. What this gives us is basically a list of different pages, which again, we just clean them up, right? Let's call it that for simplicity. What we're trying to gain here is a list of pages that we can add as internal links, right? So if you have influencer marketing campaign example as a page, there might be a guide on creating an influencer marketing campaign on your website. So it's going to pick that one and a couple of others and just clean them up into nice looking JSON and hand it over. So that's where you have your internal link targets. Next up, we have a loop function, which is basically used to run the same workflow again and again for a large set of values, and to finally store the data somewhere. So if you have, let's say, 15 keywords as an example, and you want to do the SERP analysis for every single one of them, you might want to use a loop, right? Because you can then do the SERP analysis for one keyword, one value at a time, and then store everything together at the end. So this is where we're using a loop, and we are basically running the web scrape function. So scraping the content for all of the pages, the competitor pages that we extracted from the SERPs one by one. So we're looking at what kind of keywords it's ranking for. There's an LLM step that is involved here. It's summarizing this competitor's SEO strategy. There's a prompt, as you can see, it's directed to just find where the competitor is winning. Again, there's a code block, another code block, and finally, we have this AI search visibility assistant. So this is, again, we're using Sonnet. And what we're doing here is asking it to run the same exact keyword, as you can say, maybe the topic for the page at large, through AI search models to figure out what kind of visibility we currently have. Because, of course, we're not just focused on traditional search rankings. We're trying to figure out what kind of visibility and citations level you have for the page that you're trying to optimize. This is finally where we have another LLM step, which is based on everything that you've provided so far. It's going to classify whether the problem was of different, so basically different kind of audit signals. So like, word count, the target, And then finally, based on every single thing that it has found on your SERP analysis and AI visibility, so how many times are you cited, your scope, your gaps, it's going to classify whether the problem, the diagnosis was that you're actually losing rankings, you're actually on page one, maybe the content is outdated or thin, maybe you have low AI visibility. So as I mentioned, it's not an exhaustive list, the one that I provided earlier. The problems could be more than those three issues that I highlighted. Some of those examples are, as you can see, already mentioned here. So basically what this step is finally doing is saying, based on everything that we've looked at, what exactly is the issue that we want to optimize for? It might be more than one, right? So if you think maybe the content is losing rankings because of, let's say, maybe the content is just not up to date, maybe it's also the fact that competitors have updated their content recently, and now you also want to increase the depth level. So it's not just about freshness. Perhaps it's also about covering it in more depth. And then finally, we have another step here, a couple of steps here. Both are basically LLM steps. One is GPT, the other one is Opus. And what they're doing is finding you some additional sources that you can cite. So what we're doing here is asking the LLM to find, verify each outdated start and find current replacements with sources. So it's basically just looking at all of the data that you've cited in the previous post, right, the previous version, finding the gaps, and then finally replacing it with fresher data, supporting the same narrative. So it's going to have the same consistency in the actual narrative that you're pushing, the ideas that you're pushing. It's not going to totally change the piece into a totally different direction. But of course, the information will be updated. An example would be, if you follow, for example, companies like Datos, right? They run these search landscape surveys every single year. The same survey, the same structure, the same sort of data points, and you get fresher data every single year. So if you have a page that you created 3 years ago, this workflow will automatically find the latest study from the same company and replace the content with it. Cool. And then lastly, we have this right here, which is, let me see what it's doing for us. So it's refreshing this page as a complete semantic HTML document code. So this is where we're actually writing the content, right? So based on everything that we've collected as a data point, this LLM is acting as an expert SEO. Again, we're not just talking to AI in general. We're actually providing it a lot of context, a lot of data, and then finally asking it to create the piece in a way that it's semantically optimized, and taking everything into account that it has noted from the SERPs, from AI visibility analysis that it conducted. Lastly, this is where we're again using a code block to strip fences and re-inject the images. So remember at the start, we did a couple of things to just look at the raw HTML, the actual content on the page. This is where this helps us add those images back, add those, anything that we excluded from the initial stages to look at the raw textual content, re-inject everything back so that we have the page in the original form. When I say original form, I don't mean like the text, but rather how the page was laid out. So it's not missing anything. And then finally, we add legend and we're good to go. So what we have here is the entire workflow that should get you the content that performs better compared to what it was performing as previously. So if we go back to the sheet, right, to the other tab where we were running the workflow, this is the page where we ran the workflow. While it was running, we were looking at the blocks, the building blocks of the workflow. And you can see this is the updated version of the page, right? So we have it mentioning what is the new content that it added, all of the content that was rewritten or updated, the pieces that were removed, the status updated, or AI citation optimized. And you can just go through it and make decisions. Maybe there are pieces that you want to still exclude, or just like maybe there are still things that you want to keep that AI decided to remove, all of that stuff. So it's basically giving you an option to do whatever you want, make manual edits. Now, if we were to run this, right, like we've seen this working on a page level, but what we want to do is identify which pages are going through, this decline in performance, let it be for traditional search or AI search. I don't think we'll have the time for running through all of the features of Slate, of course, but just to give you a very quick preview, I'm going to hop onto a different workspace here inside Slate. The good thing about this platform is that it's stitched together in a way that it helps you just automate everything. So automating content refresh is one thing, right? But how do you find those opportunities in the first place? The good thing about Slate is you can actually just add your AI search analytics. So this is the workspace of Triple Dart. And to give you an example, I basically didn't have all of my prompts and other data sources connected inside Slate yet. So just thought I'll give you a quick preview. This is where you have your search analytics. You've loaded your prompts. You've connected your sources like Google Search Console, GA4, and it's going to pull all of that data. Then under pages, you're going to see all of those pages from Search Console syncing up and start showing you, for example, the clicks, impressions, all of that data right here. And then the best thing is it will make recommendations based on its own analysis. So if you go into actions, right, this is where you can see the suggestions for content to be refreshed. What it's saying is, hey, there are pages that are about 66 pages that are almost on page one that you might want to update. So if I just click here, it's going to point out all of those pages. Again, it depends, of course, you still need to connect those sources. Once your website is in here and it's accessing all of the data, you can just pick all of the pages. The diagnosis is already done. I haven't done anything manually, right? It's just looking at all of the content and depending on my performance inside AI and traditional search, it's making recommendations of what kind of a workflow you need to run. So if I just pick some of these pages and add to a sheet, it will take me to a sheet, which is basically a table inside Slate. So what that looks like is a sheet like this. So what you do is you go into sheet section. You can start a new. Currently, I just wanted to give you a very quick preview of what this would look like for pages in bulk. So what you can see here is I have a list of different URLs of Modash. I have the refresh issue, right? The same input that we provided on a page level. If we go back here, right, we have the refresh issue, we have the brand kit, we have additional notes. I can just provide them all in bulk within this sheet function. So refresh issue, brand kit, additional notes. Now the note here that I've added is just a very plain instruction, like make sure that you get the let's see, view, make sure you get the right data for each brand and mode answer promoted without being forced into the content. You can add, of course, anything else, right? Depending on each of the page. So then we have the content refresh engine running. This is where we can run the same workflow that we've run for one page in bulk. As you can see, we've already run this for a variety of different pages just to show you how this would be handled in bulk for multiple pages. And finally, we can see whether we want to review the output, with a human review. If you have, for example, a content editor running this workflow and they're using this sheets function, they can just look at the output from multiple pages, review it really quickly in plain text, and of course still make any changes if needed to the images or anything as such. But it can basically just go through the content, make any changes right here. If they still want to check the annotation of what part was added, what part is new, they can go through this one. And again, they can make any content changes as needed, right? So we have a human review stage, which is added within the sheets. And then finally, we can also just upload to Webflow. If you have your Webflow API, you can connect it using Slate. There are integrations to multiple CMSs, and they're building new ones. So again, you add all of your, you add this function of Webflow blog publisher, which again is very easy to build. Plus, they actually exist, and you can use them as a super block, as a built-in workflow. And we just run this. All of these are already inside my draft on Modash CMS. So just wanted to show you how you can just, once you've reviewed the content, once you're really good to go, once you can give the green light to AI-driven content, and you've made your edits, you can just push them directly to your draft inside Webflow with a single click. So again, it will run as the other workflows have run. You click it, run it, and you can run it in bulk by clicking this button, and it will just run through the list for the entire sheet for all of the rows. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope we've covered everything. We've looked at the workflows mechanics. We've looked at some of the concepts related to freshness. We've looked at how it works in a more detailed way, looking at each of the node, understanding what function each is performing. And then finally, we're running it in bulk, showing how it moves everything with automation. The good thing about Slate is you can just run everything end to end. You can start with diagnosis. All you have to do is connect your sources, let it find what's wrong with your site, and then be the judge so that you can still control what kind of recommendations it's making. Of course, we're not saying just let it overtake everything. That should never be the case with automation in general. But if you can just be there to make really good judgment calls and give it directions, you can set up workflows for everything. As an example, the workflow that I've just shown you, right, this one for content updates, this already lives now as a content refresh engine for the customers who use Slate, and they can just literally just start using it already. So the team is building these workflows, and now they live as a super block. The super block is basically where content refresh engine now lives, among many other ones that you can see. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Awesome, Usman. Thank you so much. And I think that's exactly what people were hoping to walk away with today. Um, taking an initiative like content refresh as a more systematic, repeatable operation that can kind of be humming in the background is a just completely different way of thinking about content operations, right? And the detailed look with all the nodes kind of just shows how valuable uh this all is, right? Like you can add so much into it to give such accurate and recent context to make such a valuable output. And it's also one thing to talk about refreshing at scale, right? Like this, we're just talking about like one URL, but you're actually doing this for a ton of URLs at the same time. Um, yeah, we actually had a couple of questions come in from the audience during your presentation. So I think it's fair to go into those right now. This one comes in from Arcel. Apologies, Arcel, if I'm mispronouncing your name. But they say, Hi, Usman. How do you go deeper for competitive depth without diluting the topic intent while still covering all relevant aspects of the topic?
Hmm. I'm curious. Let me know if I'm getting the question right. So we're talking about how can we cover the content in depth competitively without letting the SERPs overtake what kind of content we create, if I'm not wrong. Um, I guess my thought process usually is, if I've understood the question right, is I am a big fan of not letting the SERPs control what kind of content we create, but rather thinking that, hey, we are going to create what we think is best for the ICP, and then we're going to optimize for search as a sprinkle on top. So I guess the best way to think about this is, you don't want your competitors to control what you create, right? You have already a narrative related to, let's say, influencer marketing in the case of Modash, maybe some other company for some other category. So we have a point of view about how things should be done, right? And we have a specific way of running those processes based on the company's philosophy and many other things. So the way I think about this is like, as an example, right? Some of the content briefs that I've been creating for the writers recently, the weightage that I give to SERP analysis, depending on like, what kind of content already exists, is very low. What I'm saying is, hey, we're going to create the best piece of content available on the internet for this topic. And if that means we just like, not optimize it in the traditional sense, and we end up on maybe second position rather than number one in Google, I'm fine with that. So the way I think about this in the form of building a workflow, and this is the good thing about some of these workflow building tools, is that you can control that weightage. You can say, hey, do the SERP analysis, but don't let it hijack the content outline, the content draft, but rather, here are some of the point of views of my company, and just make sure that, or maybe some subject matter and expert interviews, right, on a topic. And you can say, here are a couple of transcripts, and I want you to add a node using all of the input from these set of transcripts and define some of the H3s based on this. So it's still competitive, as in we're not ignoring the SERPs, right, completely. We're not abandoning it as a step, but we're basically reducing its weightage. We're saying we're not going to let it hijack what content we create. We're going to create what we want to create. And that step of SERP analysis will be there as an optimizer to still like optimize for SERPs. So yeah, so again, like, depends. You can just like change the weightage. That's my point, right?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I got a question. When it comes to the six forces framework, which of the six do you feel like teams kind of skip most often, and which one has the highest impact when you actually fix it?
Mm. I think, to be honest, it's I guess my the way I think about this is usually companies mess up on the form and voice element, right? So where we think about brand positioning and other kind of things, just talking about how you add the voice of your company, but at the same time, there are so many companies who still don't get the basics of SEO right. Oops.
Hmm.
So, for example, the intent alignment, right? If I could just show you really quick, is these are the two that I'm talking about. I guess we have this one right here, which is alignment of intent, like just general search intent analysis. So many companies, I know it might feel weird to some really good SEOs, but there are still so many companies who mess this up, just not looking at SERPs. All they think about is classifying the keywords into informational, commercial, transactional sort of layers, and then just creating content on it. But there are literally so many deep layers of intent analysis, right? You figure out, hey, do we need to add some visuals? Do we need to have the question answered in the very first few sentences or not? So all of that stuff goes into intent alignment, and keeping it up to date, of course, becomes hard. But then the second part would be definitely brand positioning and stuff, right? So many companies just think that all they have to do is create a piece of content that is objectively true, and in a world of LLMs, of course, that is not enough. If I'm creating a piece of content, like the best way to think about this is if you are an SEO or a content marketer, do you ever go on Google and say, like content marketing tips? No, for the most part, if you are experienced, you would search for something like content marketing tips, Ahrefs or SEMrush, right? Because you want to consume the content from a specific company. Why? Because they've positioned their brand really, really well over the course of years consistently. They're not just saying this is what this is like a couple of things that you can do for AI search optimization. What they're basically saying is, hey, this is what Ryan Law believes you can do really well for AI search optimization, right? So again, like it's backed by their own brand, the people behind their brand. So I think both of those two elements would be really important.
Nice. Yeah, I love that you touched on the importance of brand because I think a follow-up question is when it comes to handling, brand guardrails, let's say at scale, you're making updates across a multitude of URLs, right? You're running these as bulk refreshes through Slate. Do you have a process that you utilize when it comes to like, do you individually review each one after the output to make sure that, the brand guardrails are there? Or like, how do you make sure that, um, the output is communicating the right brand positioning,
Yeah.
just to, double check everything?
Yeah, 100%. I think the best way to do it, like maybe on a systematic level, if we're thinking in the workflows language, is if you have perhaps another workflow that just does a QA for your piece of content and compares it with the actual input provided. Maybe that would be a systematic way to do it again on scale. But again, if we want to do some manual checks, typically what I'm looking for is how well this piece goes against the voice of our brand and the quality standards that we have. So, and when we say quality, again, it becomes a very broad term, but I'm looking for specific things like, um, you know, are we really meeting the searcher's expectation as soon as possible? Are we cutting down the time to value, as soon as possible, the shortest possible? So, for example, if
Think we might have lost audio, Usman, from you. I can't hear you, or I'm assuming that other people can't hear you either.
Yeah,
how
can't either.
Okay, you're back. You're back.
Okay. Looks like my mic was acting weird. But basically, what I was saying was normally what I'm thinking about in terms of quality is, AI will just AI sometimes, within content. Like, of course, you can stitch together the best workflows, but still, some of these foundational models are still not absolutely perfect. So you can look for hallucinations. Just generally, like one thing that I've noticed is if you provide a really strong narrative, but it's compacted in like you're not very expansive in your details, and you're just highlighting maybe one or two things, it will just focus on those throughout the piece. So if I say like, hey, this the limitation of this one competitor or this one topic, is this one thing. It will just keep regurgitating that, right? So I guess based on the input, if you can say, what is the quality standard of my piece in general, and I break it down into a checklist, it will help you just, classify and maybe segment different ideas of quality. So it could be stuff like, hey, is the introduction matching what I want to add, cutting down the time to value? Are we really covering the topic in a way that it matches the intent? If it's a listicle and people are already at a decision making stage, but we're getting them into what is an influencer marketing software, of course that's not the best way to do it. And then there are the rest of the things like, hey, do we need visuals? Do we need anything else? Is there an opportunity for us to go beyond what we've already covered, but AI was already able to source? And again, there are things that AI will still not be able to do, right? Like, for example, when we create a piece of content, we already know that there's a original research running, which will be ready to cite maybe in a week, right? Because maybe the product team is working on it, the brand marketing team is working on something that we can plug into the piece, and it will really elevate the quality. So those are the things that you still want to check and manually inject.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this follow-up question from Weiss, they say, my question is, how does this workflow make sure the content quality is not compromised? Is there any checking system, or does it still require human intervention for quality control? And I think there's an opportunity for both here. I think when it comes to checking content quality or utilizing an AI to kind of double check content quality, you can probably submit a sort of checklist or like a rubric, like post validation requirements. Like, does it hit the brand voice? Does it talk about like these specific things? And you can, obviously that's more of a high level and somewhat can get in depth, but to also cover your base, it probably requires a little bit of human intervention to just double check, right? Usman, do you have any other thoughts on that?
I think the meta concept to understand is when you're talking to AI, you have to totally exclude or at least significantly reduce subjectivity, right? So when we say like, how do we make sure its quality is really good? Quality just becomes an umbrella term. But if I can say, this is what quality looks like to me, this is an SOP for QAing the content that you publish, like it needs to have a visual, it needs to have this, you need to follow this particular structure, then it becomes clear. The way I think about this is like you're communicating with an intern, right? And if you can define them very, very clearly what quality looks like, then perhaps you can build a separate agent, a separate workflow, and have it run, a quality analysis on the content that is created. Still, I don't think publishing totally blindly would be a good way to do it. Still, having someone operate and use these tools would be the best way to do it. But again, even for them, defining quality would be foundational. So I think if you have maybe a very standard and specific set of instructions of what quality looks like for Modash versus for Triple Dot versus for Slate, that would be helpful. You can turn it into a workflow and run it in bulk. And finally, you can still have a human in loop. That will never be a bad idea.
Awesome. Cool. Well, that pretty much brings us to time. I guess we have one more follow-up question. Sorry, Usman. Also, some clients are more concerned about AI-generated content levels since these updates are being done by AI. How do we make sure the content does not become overly AI-generated? Is there any way to control or maintain the AI content percentage?
I think maybe again a broader answer would be that if there are folks who think AI content is just inherently bad, they have a philosophical problem with automation, right? With AI that needs to be addressed separately. But if they mean that, hey, as long as the content looks good, if it meets our quality standards, we don't really care how it was generated. So that's the thesis I think that you should lead with. I'll give you a very quick example. Recently for Modash, we were working on a listicle generator as a separate piece, a building block, something that we work with an engineer to build. And we recently rolled it out, and we had the same editor that we had on our team handling most of our blog content, judge the content, and he said, and by the way, it took us like 2 months to build that entire generator, right? It was an actual tool that we put out. So the editor who was on our team, responsible for all of the content that goes live, he said, I simply cannot spend more than 30 minutes or sometimes even 15 minutes on this piece because it really objectively meets all of my quality standards. Now, it doesn't really mean that it's taking away his job. It's more about like he can spend his time on more deeper kind of pieces that AI cannot do a really good job of. So that's one. Like if you just have to define what quality looks like, and if it meets or exceeds that quality, you don't have to be inherently against AI. If the question is more about how do we control or maintain the content in a way that it does not sound I think again, like hire a really good editor, right? Like just like someone having someone in the loop who is still responsible for controlling the output of these tools is the way to do it. You're not gonna like build a set of agents, at least in 2026, and run the entire playbook with working 5 hours a week. You still need someone who can maintain quality, look at everything, look at how things are connected, and then make decisions. So I think if it's like, how do I, reduce the language of AI, not have it repeat words and all of that stuff, you can tweak some things in the workflow. You can build additional workflows for quality checking, but still at the end, you still need someone to review the content and make manual edits.
Awesome. Thank you, Usman, so much for giving us such detailed answers. And I'm sorry that we're a little bit over time here. If you have any questions for Usman, feel free to connect with him. Before you wrap up, Usman, if anybody wants to follow your work, go deeper into your playbook, ask some questions, where's the best place to find you?
LinkedIn. I'm usually creating the most amount of content there. I'm spending a lot of time there. Technically, it's always open on my laptop as a separate tab. So if you want to get in touch, say hi. That's the best platform for us to connect. And yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, we're going to make sure that Usman's LinkedIn is in the follow-up email as well as the recording and these amazing diagrams that he's put together. And yeah, for anyone here who wants to explore Slate, whether that's the content refresh workflows or the AI visibility tracking or any of the bulk execution, you can check out slatehq.com. You can book a demo on there. I think we also have shared, yep, Suda has shared the link as well if you want to come check it out. We'd love to show you what this looks like against your own content library. Usman, thank you again so much for taking us a look under the hood when it comes to that workflow, showing all the individual nodes and giving such detailed answers. I know a lot of people are walking away with a lot of valuable insights and a system to execute on all of this.
Thank
So
you so
yeah,
much for
thank
the
you again.
opportunity. Appreciate it, Glenn. Thank you so much for you and the team, of course, for letting me do this.
Yeah, of course. Cool. Well, thank you everybody for joining, and we will see you all in the next one. All right. Bye-bye.